Hello. Today I'm going to look more closely at the observer effect by describing the famous double slit experiment. In the original double slit experiment, which was actually conducted nearly 2 centuries ago, the light source came in the form of a laser beam. It was pointed at a blank screen, but in between the projector of the beam and the screen, there was another screen that had 2 horizontal slits in it, like the number 11 turned on its side, through which the light could pass to create a pattern on the blank screen behind it. The results of the experiment were not what they expected. The pattern formed on the blank screen was wave-like. There were several bands that had a greater density of photons that faded in their density before increasing again in density. But there was a twist. They plugged in a detection device and pointed it at one slit to establish whether a single photon or atom passed through that slit or the other slit. And when they did this, they found that about half of them passed through the top slit and half of them passed through the bottom slit. And the pattern on the blank screen mimicked the pattern of the 2 slits as they had originally predicted it would. So when they spied on the experiment, the results were drastically different. The light photons behaved differently when being watched than they did when not being watched. When the experimenters unplugged the detection device, the wave-like pattern emerged again. One would not suppose that the light photons knew that the device had been disconnected, but they were behaving differently as a result. This experiment established that light behaves like a wave and also like a particle, depending on whether it is being observed. A particle is something fixed in space and time, and a wave represents infinite possibilities. The experiment has been repeated countless times since then, using various subatomic particles. In 1927, 2 research teams conducted the experiment using electrons in place of photons, both independently of one another, and the observer effect was observable there too. So the observer effect could be described as the fact that the observer affects the outcome of any experiment simply by observing it. When light is acting like a wave, we could say the photon is in a superposition, hanging in the balance between here or there, and when the observer is present, the observer places it in one position or the other, thereby collapsing the wave and fixing the photon in space and time, and now it's behaving like a particle. The thought experiment of Schrödinger's cat is the best illustration of this. The cat, unobserved because it's inside the box, is both alive and dead or in superposition until the moment comes when a conscious agent checks inside the box. The outcome is rendered in the moment the observer perceives the cat, not the moment before or any of the moments before that. This is the mechanics for how we render what we think of as reality on the fly. Is it reality if it isn't permanently there, independent of our minds? That's the big existential question which mystics find a simple answer for. Reality must be permanent and unchanging to qualify as reality. It's not subject to our whims or our thinking. A Course in Miracles puts it as simply as possible with the following quote, which could be described as acim in a nutshell. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. Perhaps you can see the connection between the observer effect and confirmation bias more clearly now. The conscious agents all have wills, which means they have a vested interest in seeing one thing rather than another, and often the vested interest is simply to keep perception as stable as possible so we don't feel wobbly and uncertain. That's essentially how emotions get involved in the mechanics of perception. It gets far more complicated later as we introduce the idea of split wills, but I will hold off on that for now. The claim, which the double slit experiment confirms, is that we see things there because we want them to be there. If you've ever marveled at how both sides in a debate, such as vaccinations, both have scientific research to present which backs up their side of the argument, it can be explained very simply. One group of science wants to find that vaccinations are safe and effective, while another group of scientists wanted to find that they are dangerous. What incentivizes the scientists? Well, their funding does. Who's paying for the research? What do they want to find out? If it's a pharmaceutical company paying for the research, they want it to be safe and effective, and their scientists unwittingly comply. They give them what they want and get paid fitness payoff points in the form of money. None of this is happening with conscious intent. It's just that we're lying to ourselves. We're unwittingly teaching what's false is true, and for valid reasons, because it would be emotionally overwhelming for most of us to accept the truth until we know for certain it rests on a stable foundation. Essentially, we are living in the Matrix, but the conspiracy isn't accurately represented by the movie. The conspiracy in the Matrix was sourced from an external sinister force. In this explanation, with our clinging to the wish for separation by way of the ego thought system, we are all responsible for our own distorted perceptions. So I'm the lead conspirator in my own virtual reality, and you're the lead conspirator in yours. There are still more relevant psychological phenomena to discuss. Out of the observer effect came two more, which I haven't mentioned yet: the echo chamber and the snowball effect. Tomorrow, I'll tackle both of them in my next video. Thanks again for joining me.